We finally made it up into the mountains. We're gonna paint this massive, beautiful scene. I don't know if you guys can see it. There it is. And the whole thing is really interesting. So I've been trying to paint for the last little while. I was really unprepared for the amount of wind that there is up in the mountains. Of course there's wind up there, right? But physically, I just wasn't prepared for that. And what I mean is, I've been painting on loose canvas. I think our trip through the desert really took a number on a number of my tripods that have been sitting in the back. They've been dry and become super brittle and broken. So I've got this metal one right here, and it's not really designed for this, but that's okay. So I finally made it back up. This time around, I am painting on aluminum composite, which is a thin layer of aluminum, or aluminum if you're American, then a layer of plastic in the middle, aluminum on the other side. And it's super light, super durable. And this is the only size that I have right here, right now. So apparently today we're gonna be painting big. And I've generally found with these big one shots, they're either, it's gonna crumble or it's gonna be brilliant. And there's no in between, there's no in between. So I'm hoping today we have a breakthrough rather than a breakdown, but I suppose we'll see, right? So this is one thing I'm learning about painting mountains. They are really hard. They are really, really difficult to paint. And the reason is, well, one of the many reasons, is there's so much detail and so much variation within such a small space of color and value, how light and how dark things are. And everything as it recedes back becomes more and more minute in how close to exact you need it to be in order to communicate well. And it's really hard. So I think I've mixed one of my main colors for this, and we're gonna see how it goes from there. All right, so here's the final painting. I think it came out pretty well given the constraints that I had. And the time is definitely up. There's so many clouds in the sky that I'm just not gonna get that sun on the face of that mountain again in fullness. And that's okay. So we're gonna pack this up for the day and head on out.
We'll be back to finish that painting later, but for now, we're gonna head down to the river, closer to home, to see if we can find something a little bit different to paint.
So I think Glacier might be the place where I'm working on paintings that I really don't think I can finish. What I've chosen in front of me is just this white water scenario. Everything is complicated. Everything is absolutely beautiful and stunning, and there's so much movement. And I'm gonna try and work this in gouache. Gouache is an opaque watercolor where I can continually add layers. I can continually create more and more detail, but I wanna start everything really, really wet, almost like a watercolor, and have everything merge and blur together. And there's these moments of clarity I want to try and capture with this. The moments where we start to get some of the white water coming together. Absolutely beautiful, but it's really difficult. So I'm not sure how this is gonna go, but hey, that's what we're here for. Here to learn rather than to create, really final pieces. And if I can do that, then the next painting I make will be even better. That's just how this thing works. So yeah, let's give this a go. So if I had a chance, I'd probably come back and do a second round for this, but I'm kind of not sure that I am going to get a chance. I think we're headed out relatively soon. But despite how ambitious I feel like this was, there's a lot of this that worked out well for me. And so I'm really happy with that. I think I want a bit more clarity in some of this. I'm gonna see, maybe we can add a little bit more of the shadows into the rocks underneath. But there still is a nice sense of chaos in all of this. So for now, I think we're just gonna head out. Maybe things turn out so we get another chance to come back and clarify a lot of this. Maybe not. So let's see what happens.
Let's go for a little drive. So I was thinking about taking a small break from painting and seeing if we can meet up with a local artist and friend of mine, Richie Carter, in his studio located just about half an hour from Glacier National Park.
Hey, how's it going?
Richie works primarily in oils and spends a lot of his time painting outside, as well as traveling all over to find inspiration. And I wanted to ask him about what does it mean to him to travel as an artist.
I've always felt like, as an artist, like I kind of think of like this big funnel we have on the top of our heads. And like all the experiences and conversations we have with people, movies we see, you know, anything that it doesn't even have to be directly related to art, just goes into there. And as the artist, it just all kind of like digests over time. And then I feel like that's what comes out for me. And so traveling is one of those things that it feels like a very nourishing thing for me as an artist. And it is then directly related to painting because I love to go and plein air paint.
Right. So one of the things that I really love about your paintings that I have from the very beginning that I actually find very difficult myself is you always capture kind of a very specific time of day.
Yeah.
And the hard part about painting when you're there in person is that the light changes so much so rapidly. And I'm always impressed by you in that it feels very cohesive.
Yeah.
This is the time of day you're painting here. So we have ones like this, where I bet this light did not stay this way for that long, right?
No, it did not.
Is that kind of about you storing that light in your head or a quick application?
So these ones are actually, these are studio pieces.
Sure.
So when I'm out there, I'll do little, even smaller sketches. So
yeah.
One of those things is I can work smaller so I can work quicker.
Yeah.
But then it's also like just super washy and I'm not worrying about getting the textures and build up that I would.
Right.
Probably like, you know, we were talking about painting in Glacier Park when even in the middle of the day, things change so quickly.
So rapidly.
And so that is something that like, you know, painting these times a day on site, you just have to get used to being able to record things very quickly. But then kind of that commentary or that question I asked you, like, do you take studio practice and bring it into the plein air? That's what I do mostly when I do this time of day plein air paintings, because I'm like, oh, I know this, I have to get the ground plane to look anything on the earth to be a darker value. Like, let's get it to be a 7 so that the sky can, if the sky is only like a 4 or 5, because it's actually not as light as you might think at that time of day.
No, never is.
And so I use the ideas of what I know because I paint in the studio and bring it into plein air too. So anything helps to speed up that process because it is so quick.
Yeah. So you're intentionally pushing some of this stuff in here in pasta.
Yes.
It's going to be lighter.
Yeah.
And so intentionally pushing it down so that you can make that sky safe.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. But yeah, really, I mean, I feel like nature is just like the best teacher where like you just go out and the amount of crappy paintings I've made, which help to now then have ones that are successful, but it doesn't go without just going out and getting your butt whooped by plein air painting.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was just doing a workshop and I was teaching, I'm like, okay, you're gonna do a block-in of, well, you're gonna paint the same scene, draw it in 4 different compositions first, and then you're gonna paint it in each one. And every time you do it, it's like you're just more informed for the next one, even if they're not successful, but it's at least so you're like, oh, that was way quicker drawing it in because I was already familiar with the elements and whatnot. But so that totally helps going back to the same scene.
I do have more questions.
Yes.
Where we have, honestly, like a relatively limited color palette. Is that, are you taking that palette directly from what you see, or are you intentionally limiting?
It is just from what I am seeing.
Yeah.
I'm always so shocked, like with a limited palette, how broad of a spectrum you can get, and how lifelike, not even a low light time of day, but full daylight with 3 primaries, white and like burnt sienna. Like, it can feel so naturalistic and so broad that I actually like that limited factor of it. And you know, when I do these types of scenes, I'm just like really drawn to just super subtle shifts and things. And that's what I get excited about when I'm actually painting. So my brain just likes doing that, where, you know, my studio partner that I share here with, he'll look at some things and he's like, I would never try it or want to paint that. Like that, I can see that Richie would paint that, but like, But for me, I just get excited about that limited, like, you know, tonal quality to things.
I love that. I've always loved that about your work.
It gets me excited, and I can like feel it when I'm out there, even just driving in the landscape, and I see those scenes. I'm just like, it like moves me, you know. So I'm like, okay, I want to create the painting that also helps other people feel that way, you know, because I feel that's my response to the.
When we were doing the Sun Road,
the
one that goes right through the middle of Glacier Park, and it was a really emotional day for me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even pick out. It was like the amount of intense wonder. Just seeing these crazy
That's
mountains.
amazing.
It's so moving.
I was just driving it a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to my friend. I'm like, man, I would give anything to see this for the first time as an adult, because I love being with people when they drive it for the first time. They're just like,
oh my God.
It's overwhelming, but especially as an artist, that's the one thing where you're like really taking in the light effect that happens up there.
I think overwhelming is the right word. I was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You see these things in media, and then some part of me didn't believe it.
Yeah.
And then you're there and you're like, oh, it actually happens in real life.
Yeah.
It's actually that big. Or when you're facing these massive mountains and the sun is in the direction of the mountain, and it's just pure gradient.
Yeah. This one is a plein air that I did a couple weeks ago. But yeah, where the sun just like completely abstracts the shape and makes these really subtle gradients from left to right, top to bottom.
And I know some part of me, if I was painting this from imagination, would be like tree. There is no tree.
There's no trees.
No tree.
No trees. It's just giant shapes. You know, people who are not artists do not see that way.
No, exactly.
And I'll point them out sometimes to people, and they're like, oh my God, it does gradate. And then they might see a painting and not know why it respond so well to it. But yeah, just all these little gradients from this more blue-green to this. It's just really slight, but just a little further away, you know.
So we're back at the river for round 2, trying to get these rapids to really feel nice. Yesterday, I feel like we did good. Good work was done. I was really happy. I very rarely work this large in gouache. And so I was really happy that I was able to accomplish as much as I was. But it still feels like, though I think there are some places that are relatively concrete, feel full and stable, there's a lot of places that could do with a bit of help in terms of really getting the feeling of this river in here. And so I'm very excited about this. This is good. I'm very happy. So today I'm going to be focusing on trying to lock in on just a couple of areas and get the details right. There's also some places in here that are a little bit unfinished. Unfinished is perfectly fine, so long as it helps the painting. And so there's some places here where I want to continue the painting. They feel a little unfinished, and they feel like they might need to actually have a little bit more to them. So between solidifying some of what's happening, making it easy to look at, I always want my paintings to be a pleasure to look at. And sometimes there's definition in that, and sometimes there's mystery in that. And generally there's a line in between. So we're gonna give this a go. There might be a bit more cloud coverage today, so it should be interesting. Let's check it out. All right, well, the clouds have started to roll in and I think it's just about to rain. So here's the question. Can I actually get this painting back to the studio, back to the camper, intact before it really starts to downpour? It is such a shame because I feel like I was just starting to get the groove. You know, this as a painting, it's been very disparate. And there's not a problem with that, but like I said before, I like that fine line in between complete and utter chaos and something that's really tight and makes sense. And so I want the chaos, but it also needs to make sense. It always needs to have mystery while letting it be obvious what it is that we're working with. That's my personal preference. And I feel like we were just starting to move away from complete and utter chaos and starting to move towards something that is going to be a little bit more unified, a little bit more cohesive and together. And it's okay. I still like it as a painting, but I was just starting to get to the point where I was finding these moments in the painting that were separate that I could pull together to make something unified. And Neil Gaiman said something once about writing. So the first draft is just about putting ideas down. The second draft is about making it look like everything was intentional all the time. It's kind of the same thing, right? This part where it's just brushstrokes, just throwing everything down is our first draft and coming back in and making everything tie together to feel unified. That's our second draft. That makes it pretend like we knew what we were talking about all along. If you're an artist, if you're watching, one of the things that I really recommend, that I'm really playing with this and just in general, is the idea that rendering being really smoothing things out, really being very neat and tidy and getting everything, really smooth and perfect. It doesn't actually do the job that it promises it's going to do. It doesn't actually make things feel good. And that you could solve the problems that you think you're trying to solve with rendering by putting the right brushstroke in the right place and leaving it. And I don't think there's a problem with either. There's a tendency to feel like really pushing and over-rendering something is solving a problem that I don't think it's always solving. This is how you get things that feel super smooth, but unnatural. And this is how you get things that feel like crazy brushstrokes everywhere, and they feel lifelike. This is the dichotomy I'm playing with. And then I feel, oh my goodness. All right. Now we gotta run. Well, I most definitely did not beat the rain, but painting is covered. Carrying the painting upside down so it doesn't get wet. And gonna put my camera away now so my camera doesn't get wet, but I'm gonna be soaking by the time I get home. Wish me luck. Do you ever use a palette knife?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a sort of like a textural quality in your work.
Yeah.
I've never quite achieved in mine that I'm seeing palette knife in.
Yeah. Yep. And that's actually in my workshop. One of my students was like, "What's that? You have some technique you do with a palette knife?" I was like, "Oh yeah, let me show you," because it's something that I've kind of developed myself, but also by looking at some of my one of my favorite artists in particular, Brent Cotton. He'll do these insane paintings like all with palette knife, and I was like, how does he do that? Because I love this effect that it gives. And so when I saw one of his paintings in person, I'm like, oh, okay. So then I started, implementing it, trying to mess around, but then I came up with how I use it, and like I'll do like the full block in of something, like the first pass, and then I'll take the palette knife on its, face like this and just scrape, smear, and just start breaking everything apart. And people watching are like, no, you're ruining it. I'm like, no. And then I start bringing things back and getting thicker paint. But that's like all of these have that, like, it'll just, and that's why I paint on linen, because it'll pick up little pieces. I start here and drag it up, and it'll pick it up in that grid format, which I really like. But if I'm on a panel, it'll just smear, and it's not quite the same. So
what I really admire about yours in your palette knife work is that sometimes it feels like there's a big divide between brushwork and palette knife.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like they don't
mesh
they don't work together, right?
But yours does. Like yours feels really
Cool.
natural.
I like.
Feels like
Thank you. I know what you
watercolor
mean.
can get that way as well. Very gimmicky. Very like, oh, here's
Right.
something that works, and so
Right.
you put it
So
in everything.
yeah, exactly. It's like a little trick
Yeah.
I can use for everything. Exactly. And that's actually why I think I'll always paint from life, is because you can't, and really just observe while out there, because just not to get stuck in it with conventions.
Yeah.
Whether it's how a tree looks or how I paint a tree every time. It's like, no, I'm gonna do something different every time, you know?
Right.
Whereas in the studio, you can start falling back on those gimmicks sometimes more so. But yeah, plein air painting is just such a great way to like keep it fresh, and
The best.
it is the best. And then you're out there, it's just, yeah, it's the best. But it always comes with a little panic.
Always, every time. Just panic.
That's the one thing, like when I teach, I'll tell them that, I'm like, every time I come out here, I'm like, oh God, like there's this anxiety and apprehension. And they're like, wait, really? I'm like, yeah, like it doesn't go away. Like sometimes I can go out there and I see it and I'm like, okay, yeah, more excited and I know a bit more confidently, but like, I'm always like, oh,
I always think about
How's it gonna
as
go?
the extreme sports of painting.
yeah.
It's like, if you're you can't prepare for it.
No.
Your preparation is like your 10 years prior to it.
Right.
But then you also like, you can't hold on to anything.
I know.
You have to let go of everything and just be completely in the moment, and it'll either work or doesn't, and to some degree you're not in control.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, it's like, well, that was 2 hours. And honestly, every time I do a bad painting, I'm like, great, that's one more that's out of me. Like they're all in there somewhere, and I'm just like, yep, had to come out. So
Can we do a quick flip through of the watercolors?
yeah. These are strictly only traveling. Like this is my journal.
It might be too personal, so like,
No, it's good. I've shared a little bit, but I don't do that much. I have one that's totally filled as well. Yeah, some of these I'm like, oh man, these were great little watercolors. They're so
They
old.
are.
2014, jeez. But they have memories with them all. Like I remember setting these fruit up in Panama. So yeah, it's just crazy, all the actual memories that are linked to these. You know, there's all this Panama trip, Europe, of course, France.
one of the things I love
Zion.
about watercolors, you can't help but to be entirely honest.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, these are all where you're going next, down in southern Utah, Tucson area, Glacier. God. Yeah, this was one. This was a perfect example of getting your butt whooped. Glacier. Yeah, these are great. And I take them every time I travel in.
So we made it back here for day 2. The difference is that today the sun is out. There's barely any clouds in the sky, and what we do have is very different, and so the painting is going to have to either adapt or die. So what we could do is just take some of the elements that were straight in the sunlight and shift them around. That might be part of the plan, or we could just pivot entirely and try and get this new light in. I think it's probably gonna be a mixture of both. One interesting thing about light is that so long as what's happening internally is relatively consistent, then the painting will work. If there's a shadow going this way and a shadow going that way, the painting won't work. But there's so many variables in nature when it comes to light, the lighting conditions we encounter, that our brain doesn't automatically detect something as being wrong unless what's happening internally is inconsistent. So we're gonna have a look at this and see what happens. So there's a couple of things that I feel like I learned through this. One of them is that when we're dealing with such vast distances, any slightest change in what the sun is doing and what the atmosphere is doing just creates a completely different color scape. We went from having these mountains really clear, really clear at some point, to over a matter of about a minute, it felt like, it just went straight into haze. And so all of the colors, all the values changed, everything swapped. And so I have to be working in a relative sense. And I have to remember what things were like before rather than just painting exactly what I see. Otherwise I'd constantly be chasing the sun. And then the second thing is that more of a kind of like, the more you know you don't know kind of situation, right? There's so much subtlety and brilliance and unity in what I'm seeing right here that, yeah, I know this is a bit later in the day, and so that's gonna happen. But nonetheless, there's so much more I need to paint in order to start feeling comfortable painting mountains and really getting a feel of what I'm seeing. And I love that. I absolutely love that. But for now, let's head on out.